Hello, folks. You're on Lunch Conversations with Randy and Teddy. And for those who have never seen this lovely face that's talking to you right now, I'm Teddy Burriss, and my co-partner, the shiny-headed guy, which you'll be able to see in a moment, is Randy Wooden. Our special guest today is Tina Ketchie Stearns. We'll tell you more about her in a minute, so hang tight. I want to thank our sponsor, Blackwell Captive Solutions, for helping us make this happen for the first 6 months of the year. Blackwell Captive Solutions is a healthcare plan company. They help you focus on potentially one of your biggest spends, which could be, if you're self-insured, your healthcare insurance for your employees. They help you equalize the playing field so you're paying the right amount of money for the insurance that you're providing to your employees. So if you're self-insured and you're self-insured for your healthcare for your employees, reach out to blackwellcaptive.com, blackwellcaptive.com, and let them know that Teddy Burriss said that you guys should talk. So while Randy's finishing up the little behind-the-scenes stuff that he's doing, good stuff. Those have never, again, I'm Teddy Burriss. I work for a company called Burriss Consulting. That means I work for my wife. We have a business where we teach business professionals how to use LinkedIn as a business tool. We do corporate training, public speaking. We do one-on-one coaching, YouTube channel, and Chorus Space out there. And I'm actually considering bringing out the sandwich board and standing back out.
Oh, really?
Space. Yeah, I think about going back out and proselytizing again, Randy.
Wow. Between proselytizing and pneumonia in the chat box, we're busting out the multi-syllable words early in the show.
Yeah.
Hey, Randy Wooden with Goodwill Industries of Northwest North Carolina, director for our professional center. And it looks like an old staycation for me. I'm actually out this week, but because Teddy hinted at that I might get a raise at some point, I thought I'd be, I thought I'd show up just to put in a word and hope that he is benevolent and sees it in the budget to up my pay ever so slightly.
I promise to try.
Yeah. Hey, if I've got clients across the country, if you're a professional or you know one that may be in a job search and could use some help trying to figure out those next steps, because again, it's not always easy, and whether it's facing age issues or maybe a career change or any number of reasons, it could be difficult for some folks. So reach out, find me on LinkedIn. Happy to help. And as always, get together every Wednesday with my good friend Teddy, and we talk stuff and learn stuff. And today's no exception. It's going to be good. And, it's unfortunate that this topic has to come up, but it's life and we have to deal with it. So I'll throw it back to you, Teddy. I'll keep an eye on the chat. If you've got comments or questions for Tina, put them there and I'll keep an eye and try to work them in where appropriate.
Cool. All right, let me know if you need help managing all that stuff behind the scenes. So I'm assuming we're up on LinkedIn and Facebook.
Yeah, we're good. Yep.
Cool. So I love it when the stuff works despite me. Hey, our special guest today is a good friend. Randy and I have known Tina for years. Tina Ketchie Stearns. Believe it or not, there are some people that fresh out of junior high, they go working in an industry. Tina's been doing this for 20 years, fresh out of junior high. And been in the senior care industry, including hospice and palliative care, senior living, home health. Look, these are conversations that we all need to have, whether they're for us, maybe not yet, or for our loved ones. And maybe some of us have loved ones that these conversations, hospice and palliative care, senior living, home health, are important for us to understand. And Tina and I were talking not too long ago, and I'm like, oh my God, I didn't know. And I'm like, if I don't know, then maybe there's one other person doesn't know. And so I said, Tina, how about joining us to the show? Tina, thank you for joining us. Would you introduce yourself to our audience a little better than I did, please?
I will. And thank you both for having me. And thank you for all the listeners and watchers. And as it is, the first correction I need to make is, I got into elder care in 2005, but that was after 20 years in the travel industry. So trust me. Yeah, no, I wish I'd started in that right out of college, but no. Anyway, I traveled around with, for one reason or another, lots of different jobs for about 15 years, born and raised in Winston, left and then came back in 2003, joined Hospice and Palliative Care. That's what it was called then. Now it's Trellis, supportive care in 2005.
Mhm.
I worked with them for 13 years and then worked in other areas of elder care, including senior living and home health services, that kind of thing. And the hospice end of life message was so not necessarily on my radar, but I knew what I loved and adored were elders. I just think they're the coolest, funniest people there are, and their experiences, they've done just pretty much things you haven't even thought of yet. So I just love the elder community. And when I first came back in 2005, I originally reached out to senior services to see if they had an opening. They did not, but they said, I just heard that hospice might. So hadn't thought of it, but I went and applied, and it was really just about advanced care planning. So getting your advanced directives in order. And for whatever reason, I turned that job down. And then a week later, they called me back and they said, well, we got something else we want you to look at. And I, for me, was like, that might be God telling me you're supposed to go to hospice. So I did. And I loved every minute of it. Like I said, I was there 13 years. And when I left, I continued. I've got a website called It's About How You Live, which is the national tagline of the hospice ribbon.
Yeah.
And I love that tagline because everybody thinks hospice is death and dying. And when you say their tagline is it's about how you live, they're like, what? And every hospice medical director will tell you hospice is not helping you die. Hospice is helping you live until you die.
Yeah.
Big difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's sort of how I wound up working in hospice for as long as I have, and just love educating people because there's just so much, Teddy, as you know, that, a lot of people just don't understand.
Sure. Hey, always ask the why question, and you kind of hit on that pretty hard, so we don't need to go through all of it. But if there's any more that you wanted to add about maybe when you were a kid growing up, maybe your experiences with grandparents, or there was something that triggered the thought of, hey, elderly folks have a lot to offer. They're pretty cool. I like hanging out with them. I like hanging out with Teddy. He's my elder, man. The exhibit A. But seriously, was there something maybe as a kid growing up where you said, hey, wow, this is a cool thing?
Randy, you're exactly right.
Oh, really? Okay.
I had 4 deaths in my life that were pretty significant. I only had one set of grandparents. So my grandfather passed away in the hospital, tubes everywhere. Nobody really knew. He was as close to end of life as he was. My father passed away in the hospital on a ventilator. Nobody really was understanding how close he was. However, my grandmother and my mother both died in hospice care. And the difference between the end of life experience with the 2 relatives that were in hospice care and the ones that were not was massive.
Yeah.
And so that really is one of the main reasons I was so excited and happy and grateful that my path was led to hospice education. Now, I'm not clinical, so I'm not the people that supplied the care. I did education, which is exactly what I'm doing, just like this. Just talking about hospice and palliative care, what it is, what it isn't. And it's just been a real honor. But no, those 4 deaths were sort of my reason why.
Yeah, I get it. And that makes perfect sense. Steady.
Yeah. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about what is it? I mean, if you're looking at, and you break it up however you want, Tina, but what is hospice and palliative care in a big picture? And and by the way, you nailed it. And for me, and hospice doesn't help people die; it helps people live until they die. But talk a little bit more about what that all encompasses.
Okay.
Big picture.
Yep. So doctors go to they pick a specialty. Let's say cardiology. So they're specialists in heart, or pulmonology, specialists in lung. There is a specialty called hospice and palliative care, which is about end of life care and pain and symptom management. And the best way I can help people understand this is the root word palliate simply means to ease. So if you have a sore throat and you gargle with hot salt water and that helps ease your throat, that's palliative care. But in this world, in this medical specialty world, palliative care has to do with somebody with an advanced serious illness. So not just a sore throat. This is somebody that it's an advanced serious illness. So palliative care means you have an advanced serious illness and you need your pain and symptoms managed, but you might still be seeking, let's say if you have cancer, you're still seeking treatment for your cancer or whatever the disease is that might one day prove to be terminal for you. You're still seeking curative treatment, but you need your pain and symptom managed. That's palliative care. Hospice is exactly everything I just said, with the big exception that you are now no longer seeking curative treatment, and the doctor estimates end of life is likely within 6 months or less. Now, nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody knows when anybody's going to die. But if their medical professional opinion is that you are likely within a 6-month time frame of end of life and you are no longer seeking curative treatment, then you're appropriate for hospice. So one of the visuals I usually use is if you imagine this big circle and everything in that circle is palliative care, advanced serious illness, pain and symptom management. That's palliative. Within this big circle is a smaller circle called hospice.
Gotcha.
Now we've got a 6 month or less estimate of end of life, no longer seeking curative treatment. So all of hospice is palliative, but not all of palliative is hospice.
And
Jimmy, Jimmy Carter, President Carter, he is in hospice. So that I gather that hospice is the same in terms of a definition, no matter where you live in the country.
That's right.
It's a common. Okay, so he's less than 6 months, probably, I guess, to understand his, I guess, what's imminent.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So he had cancer, and they have said on the news that he is no longer seeking curative treatment. And the fact that they brought in hospice means the doctors are estimating 6 months or less. So let me also quickly interject.
Sure.
You're not supposed to just, now you got to go die within 6 months. No. If 6 months comes and goes and you're still with us, and we love it when that happens, and it happens a lot, because if we can manage your pain and symptoms and you feel good, then yeah, you want to hang around for as long as you can, right? So if 6 months comes and goes and the doctor still estimates, okay, I still think we're in a 6 month window, then it's called recertification. It just rolls forward. We had one lady, she had emphysema. She was with us 3 years. She was scared to death to die, had a horrible childhood, and she was just scared to die. And she hung on for 3 years. But at the end of every 6 months, the doctors still estimated she had 6 months. She weighed 55 pounds when she finally passed away. Now, on the flip side of that story, can I just share that there was a woman, 100 years old, who came into hospice care. She died at 104. In that time period, hospice had to discharge her 3 times.
Really? Because
she kept perking up. Now, a perk up is often very common because, again, now you feel better and you have a little perk up, but usually the perk up is temporary. This lady was perking up so much, gaining weight. I mean, she was to the point where the doctor said, I cannot estimate 6 months or less. And if they cannot estimate 6 months or less, you have to discharge from hospice. So she was discharged 3 times between 100 and 104. So you might hear people say, my loved one graduated from hospice. Well, that simply means whatever was going on with them, the doctor was no longer able to give a medical estimation of 6 months or less.
And Scott, thank you for being in the audience and sharing that this is real to you, close to home and fresh. not knowing anything about it, I'm still sorry you went through that. But this is why I decided to bring this conversation, because I think it's relevant to all of us in lots of different ways. And so here's another question that gets asked a lot, Tina. Is hospice a place or something else?
It's a type of care. A lot of people think it's a place, especially if you live in a place like Winston-Salem. There's a hospice home called the KB Reynolds Hospice Home off Bolton Street. But not all hospices have a hospice home. So it is a type of care. It is end-of-life care. It can happen in the home. It can happen at an assisted living facility. It could happen under a bridge. One of my favorite stories was we cared for a homeless man. He wound up coming to KB Reynolds Hospice Home because he was really, really sick. And so he came there. That's when he was enrolled in hospice care. He'd been homeless for 20 years, and his dying wish was to spend one last night on the street. So our clinicians were able to make it a safe situation for him to go and do exactly that, because it basically lived, if you will, in a cemetery, and there was a used car dealership that let him shower there. So they let him come back. He spent the night. We got him back to KB Reynolds, and he passed away in the KB Reynolds Hospice Home. So when I say under a bridge, I mean, really, hospice is available to everybody, but it is not a place. And that's a real frequent misunderstanding. Like, I have to go somewhere. So my mother, for example, lived in Winston. She had access to the hospice home, but wild horses were not going to drag her out of her house. No way, no how. So we didn't care there was a hospice home because she was not interested. She was going to die in her own home, period, end of story. And happily, she was able to do that.
Yeah. There's a question, Teddy. I want to work this in, and it deals with coverage by insurance.
I got it. I got it queued up. Yeah. So hang tight, Dan. I got that queued up.
Okay. All right.
I think I do. Yes, I know I do. Because Tina and I talked about this, because a lot of pieces of this that are clearly misunderstood by everybody, you know, in lots of different ways. And so
You're in good company.
Yeah.
And so, again, whether it's for us personally or our loved ones, you know, we don't know what we don't know. And so this is very informative. I appreciate you sharing it.
So,
do you want me to get into that, or do you want to wait?
No, hang tight. I've got a plan, lady.
Okay.
All right.
You know, thanks for sharing these stories about the folks that you care for. I can imagine that they sometimes can be painful, but sometimes can be really rewarding to see people, you know, do the things they want to do end of life. You know, I can't imagine it. My father-in-law, up until recently, when he kind of got diagnosed with Lyme disease, and that put him down horribly. But before that, he was, I can't remember the right term, I want to say a hospice worker. He would go to people's
volunteer.
Yes. He would go to people's homes and sit with them, and he would take people to their doctor's appointments, their dentist appointments, and wherever, drive people all over the place. And he said that was one of the most rewarding things he's ever done in his life, because he was a part of people's lives when it really mattered for them that someone cared to help them through that journey.
That's right. And I think when hospice first started in '64 in England, the point was that no one would die alone. I mean, that was the whole hope and foundation behind it, is that, you know, nobody should have to die alone.
Yeah. So Randy?
Well, I just wonder, you know, I get the palliative part. So that's the managing pain and try to minimize that so that you can continue your treatments. And if you decide that no more treatments and you're deemed to be under 6 months remaining, then you qualify for hospice. And maybe Teddy, you're going to get into this too. What are some of the actual things that hospice does? For example, nutrition. You set up nutrition, that kind of thing. It reminded me when Teddy was talking about his father-in-law driving people to a doctor appointment. Well, yeah, maybe I stop my cancer treatment, but what if I get an ear infection and I still have to go to the doctor? That kind of a thing. Do you provide, what do those services look like for somebody who is now enrolled in hospice?
Okay. So
Okay.
if I can just say, palliative care usually just involves a nurse practitioner or a doctor that's managing the pain and symptoms, medications. When you're in the whole hospice world, now you have a whole team. You've got the doctor, the nurse, chaplains, social workers, volunteers like Teddy's father-in-law, massage therapists, music therapists, art therapists. Now, there's multiple hospices around the country. That's another misconception. People think there's just one big, huge hospice and everybody's somehow connected. The analogy I always use is in the church community, faith community, all churches are in the faith community, but they're all separate and independent. And that's how hospices are. And so if you've got listeners in places other than Forsyth County, I can almost bet you there are multiple hospices that cover your area. In Forsyth County, we probably have like 15 different hospices that cover this area. So anyway, you don't always have an art therapist and a music therapist. So you want to reach out to the hospice that you feel like you want your loved one to be a part of and see what their services are. And do they have a home? Do you care about that kind of thing? But they have to offer doctor, nurse, social worker, volunteers, and chaplains. They have to offer those services. And some people, let me speak to the chaplain piece of it for just a second. Some people say, I'm not religious. I don't want any of that. The beautiful thing about chaplains is they are not affiliated with any particular denomination. They're not there to save anybody, if you will, spiritually. They really are just there to provide support. And one of the stories I loved was this gentleman who did not consider himself religious at all, but he was the fix-it guy in the neighborhood. So if somebody's door was squeaking or the garage door wouldn't open or whatever, he was the guy that went and fixed all that. So that was his spirituality. That's where he got joy and his life's reward. So the chaplains can help people understand and connect with what brings their life meaning and joy, so that's just a little bit of an aside. But Randy, just know that all of those clinicians, that whole team, including the volunteers, which are very important, they all work together to help not just the patient, but the family as well. Because it's what happens to the patient affects the family and vice versa. Sometimes the patient is at peace with being at the end of life and the family is in complete denial. Sometimes it's opposite. Social workers can be really helpful in that regard. So, and I can also say, like I said, nobody knows when end of life is going to happen. I know with my own mother, she was in hospice care she was in palliative care for 2 years. She had COPD. There's no cure for that. There was no treatment really, but she was in palliative care for 2 years, helping her with her pain and symptoms. And then about 4.5 months before she died, they thought, we think she's probably appropriate for hospice now, meaning code 4, we think we're in a 6-month window. And sure enough, she died 4.5 months later. And about 1.5 months before she died, she said she wanted to go to the beach to drink tequila sunrise on the beach at sunset.
Yay, Mom.
There you go.
So that's what we did 2 nights in a row. So that gets back to that tagline. It's about how you live.
Yeah.
So the hospice team is trying to help their patients and families make the most out of the time they still have as comfortably as possible for as long as possible.
So here's another question that comes up a lot. When is it time to call hospice? And I didn't have this in my thought, Tina, but maybe I do need to add it and you tell me. When's it time to call hospice or palliative care? When's it time to make a phone call, whether you're the individual who needs this help or the family who wants to take care of that individual?
Right. So you do not have to have a doctor to make a hospice referral. If a family member's going, maybe they're listening to this going, oh, wow, this might, apply to Uncle Harry or what have you. Anybody can call. And what will happen is the hospice referral center where we'll send out somebody to do an assessment of the patient, and they'll determine, are they appropriate for hospice? If not, could they benefit from palliative care? So what we always like to say is, if you feel like your loved one, and we tell medical professionals this as well, the physicians, if you feel like this patient might be in a 1-year window to end of life, go ahead and call us. Because again, nobody knows. So if you're thinking it might be about a year out, go ahead and call and let them do an assessment. And just to that point where you never know how long. I know, like I said, mother was in hospice care 4.5 months. We were getting a little nervous about how long is the money going to last for us to allow her to stay home and have in-home help, because all that's expensive.
Yeah.
And I was talking to her hospice nurse about that. And I said, if this goes on another 2 or 3 months, we might need to look at assisted living or something. And that sweet hospice nurse looked at me and she said, Tina, why don't we just take it week to week? And I was like, you could have blown me over with a feather. I was like, week to week? I had no idea. And sure enough, in about a month, she had passed away. So you just never know how long this kind of thing is going to happen. So what I would say is, to the families or the physicians, if you're thinking it might be about a year out, go ahead and make that referral and let them come out and assess. And if they're not appropriate, then great, they're not appropriate. But at least, you got educated eyes on them.
That's the point there. You got a little bit more insight to make better decisions rather than guessing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
Is there an amount of time once that call is placed before the assessments are done? Is it a process, and how does that process unfold?
Just as soon as they can have somebody out there. Sometimes it's that day, sometimes it's within a week,
okay.
But whatever the scheduling is. And again, there's lots of different hospices, lots of different staffing situations. But if somebody calls and wants somebody assessed, then they're going to try to get them out there as quickly as they can.
Good.
So,
and they'll come to the home. You don't have to bring them anywhere. They'll come out to the home and assess.
Yeah. So there's a lot of pieces to this, a whole lot of different pieces, and we're not going to be able to cover it all. But and there are a lot of people who are right in front of having a need for these conversations, and then maybe they just don't know it. So and there's a lot of different families that the dynamics of families is so diverse as well. And as you said, nobody should die alone, but who's there to help? And, is there a family member that's close enough to offer help? And that for me is always so painful to see.
Yeah. And if I can just say, so the hospice team is going to come do what they do, but they're not, I don't want to say babysitters, but they're not going to stay for hours on end. They come in and they do what they do and they leave. Now volunteers can come and sit with a patient for a couple of hours.
Yeah.
And that gives the caregiver time to, go do whatever they want to do. But there are plenty of home care agencies out there that provide companionship, help with meals, help with house cleaning, help them with their ADLs, activities of daily living. So eating, dressing, toileting, that kind of thing. So the families can, which is what we did for my mother. She was not going to leave the house. So we had people to come in to be with her. Only started out with just a few hours a day. And then as time went on, it was pretty much 24/7. But there are lots of resources out in the community. Then that's another reason for the social workers. They can help connect families with all the different resources that can help them provide the kind of care that their loved ones wanting.
Yeah, a whole nother conversation about senior living support and CNAs and home health care and all that. It's a whole nother big conversation. Again, I think a lot of that is, in many respects, we're almost at the bottom of the hour, in many respects unknown or misunderstood by a lot. And
Right.
And, again, just, knowledge helps us. So be better prepared. Hey, you're on Lunch Conversations with Randy and Teddy. Look at that, Randy. It spun right to it, dude. Our special guest today is Tina Ketchie Stearns. The show is sponsored in part by Blackwell Captive Solutions. Randy and I have known Carrie and her team for a long time. Carrie's a good friend. They've got 25 plus years experience in the health insurance business. They provide a medical stop loss captive, which is designed to help organizations who are self-insured for healthcare for their employees, put a shock absorber on those high dollar claims that can catch a company, especially a self-insured company, by surprise. Hey, look, if you're self-insured for health insurance for your employees, or you work for a company that is self-insured, introduce them to Blackwell Captive Solutions, blackwellcaptive.com. Great people with a great solution to help people better manage those expenses. Cool. Tina, another thought came to my mind as we were talking that I wanted to touch on, and that is, how about before we go on another point that we had, and Dan still wants to know who's going to pay for this. How do we make decisions about what hospice and palliative care organization should we call?
Well, when I first joined hospice in 2005, there was pretty much one hospice in Winston-Salem that had probably 95% of all the hospice patients. And now, like I say, that's changed a great deal. There's like 15 different hospices. So depending on where you live, it really kind of is the family's role to figure out which hospice you think will meet your needs. If hospice home is important because they don't all have one, if having all the sort of extras like art therapy and massage therapy is important. So, and then I would just ask your friends and family who've had an experience with hospice, who did they use, would they recommend, that kind of thing, because another thing that we like to say is when you've seen one hospice, you've seen one hospice, again, because they're all separate and independent. So it really just is a matter of figuring out which hospices serve your area, and then, do a site visit if they've got a hospice home, or, go request to meet with the director of nursing, or, just kind of get to know what the services are that they offer, and then you can decide. Mm-hmm.
I kind of wonder, as an outsider, I've never been exposed to hospice. Just wasn't the case. I'm an only child, and neither parent really needed that. Anyway, that aside, the hospice. So when I think of, I work for Goodwill. Goodwill is a thrift store, and there are other thrift stores out there, but they're not called Goodwills. Mm-hmm. And so when I hear the word hospice, I associate that with a brand name and not a process. Not hospice is a certain type of care, but I associate the word hospice with Hospice of Forsyth County, as whatever it used to be called before it became Trellis. So is hospice almost like McDonald's or Burger King? Is it a brand name? Or because you say now there's 15 hospices? That's confusing. I thought there was hospice. You know what I mean?
I do. Believe me, I do. And the reason Trellis changed their name to Trellis is because exactly what you said. The first name they had when they first started, I think it was in 76 or 77, maybe 79, was Hospice of Winston-Salem, Forsyth County. Mm-hmm. Well, very quickly thereafter, they were serving patients outside of Forsyth County. So then that name didn't make sense anymore. Okay. So they changed it to Hospice and Palliative Care Center, very generic. Well, then, because all these other hospices were coming into the area, people were getting confused which hospice they were going with. Sure. So that's why they picked a very specific name that you could not confuse with anybody else. So there's Mountain Valley Hospice. There's Hospice of the Piedmont. Hospice of Greater Greensboro recently changed their name to AuthoriCare. So hospice is a service. It's a type of care for end of life. But you're going to find every name under the rainbow across the country. It doesn't have to have Hospice and Palliative Care Center in the name, but typically there will be like a subtitle that says palliative care, hospice care, supportive care, something that describes more what they do if it doesn't say hospice anywhere in the actual name. It
does. I kind of compare it, I think, to maybe daycare centers. I mean, because a daycare center, we kind of know what that is, but it would be whatever name, and then maybe below that daycare center. But I get it. Okay, well, that makes sense, because I wondered how so many different entities could have that same name. Now I understand. Thanks.
Well, it's kind of like everybody knows what a hospital is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
But they all have lots of different names. So I would recommend that your listeners just Google hospices in and then their town or their county, and then that should pop up a list of all.
And I'm with you, Tina. I think it is. Referrals are good because you get to hear what other people's experiences are, positive and negative. And you've got to understand what someone's positive or negative and how that aligns with your needs.
Right.
And the other thing is go meet the peeps. When I went and found my first bar, I toured 20 of them before I picked my favorite.
That's good though, Teddy. You're doing your homework.
Smart, Randy. It's smart, man.
I like it.
All right, so let's help Dan.
Oh, let's please do. Poor guy. He's been waiting forever.
So where does the funding come from? How much does it cost me to get hospice care for me or for my loved one?
Okay. So I'm going to blow everybody's mind real quick and say that within the United States,
Tina pays for it all?
I'm sorry?
Tina pays for it all?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Perfect.
Send me the bill. There are not-for-profit hospices and for-profit hospices. And in the US, there are more for-profit hospices than there are not-for-profit hospices. So that's another little metric you might want to figure out. Do you care? Do you care? Some people do, some people don't. So let me say that my assumption is that even the for-profit hospices will have a foundation that can cover expenses for somebody that doesn't have another way to cover their expenses. So whether it's a for-profit or not-for-profit, I would talk to your chosen hospice and make sure they've got something like that for you. But the vast majority of people that are in hospice care are 65 or older or disabled for 2 years, which means they qualify for Medicare. There is a full hospice benefit under Medicare. So it's not going to cost you a dime. You're going to get a statement every month because there is, there are expenses related to providing hospice care, but it's going to cover all of it. Medicaid is a financial need. You have to apply for Medicaid. So if you apply for Medicaid and you qualify, there's a hospice benefit under Medicaid. So I'm going to say over 90% of all hospice patients fall under either Medicare or Medicaid. I used to say I don't qualify for either, and of course now I do. So I can't say that anymore. But let's assume I was still less than 65 and I did not qualify for Medicare or Medicaid. And I happen to have private insurance. I have private insurance. So most private insurances have a hospice benefit. Let's say I'm that lovely little man that lived in the cemetery and I don't have any of that. I'm homeless. I don't have 2 nickels to rub together. Those donations that come in are going to help take care of my care. Yeah. So it's Medicare, 65 or older or disabled for 2 years, Medicaid, when people have a financial need and apply for that, most private insurances, and then donations are going to take care of the care. And I do also want to say, as far as the medications go, the medications that are covered are the ones that are related to the terminal diagnosis. So I think, Randy, you mentioned a minute ago, you might have a toothache or something that has nothing to do with your cancer, for example. Whatever the medications are that are related to the terminal diagnosis, those are going to be the meds that will be covered. And there's tiers, you start with this one. If that doesn't work, start with this one, But the approved meds for the terminal illness will be covered by hospice. I know medical director one time was making a joke, which I actually thought was hysterical, when he said, if a 80-year-old woman is absolutely adamant that we write her a prescription for Viagra, I'm not going to do it because it's not going to do her any good. So no, sorry. So if they're meds not related to your terminal diagnosis, that's on the patient and the family.
But would that fall under palliative care? I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, I opened that door, so you walk through it. That's all right. But I hope they understand that, if you've got 4 things wrong with you, and let me use the fingers that work, 4 things wrong with you, and this is the one that's the terminal diagnosis, those are the meds that will be covered through hospice. These are the 3 things will not be.
Yeah.
That's good peace of mind to know. It sounds like, the lion's share of what's needed is covered. There's a way to get it. You just have to know what door to knock on to apply and go through the process, but it's available. So that's a good thing.
And most of your listeners probably have heard the term comorbidities. So it's not uncommon that you're going to have multiple things going on, and they may all be contributing to your heart disease or to whatever it is that's going on with you that's making you so ill. So again, each hospice is going to determine which medications do qualify to be covered under the hospice benefit.
Yeah. I get
it. That gentleman's question, did he say in that answered it, or does he say?
Yeah.
I hope Dan heard that.
Yeah.
So,
are there just a quick question, regulatory boards and commissions? I mean, if I say, hey, I want to help people, can I open up a hospice facility? I mean, I got to imagine there are regulatory issues out the wazoo on this stuff. Are there boards you have to go through and licenses and just what I would assume with any medical facility? Yeah, I assume so, right?
Well, there are different state rules. Like for North Carolina, we have to have a certificate of need. You have to prove that there's a need for X number of hospice beds in a particular area. South Carolina, there is no certificate of need. So you could pop up a hospice on every corner if you wanted to. So that's a state by state thing.
Yeah.
Got it. Thanks. Teddy.
That's probably the elephant that was in the room, Tina. Most people have no idea that hospice and palliative care is available to them. And which is probably one of the big reasons a lot of people don't go looking for it. Like, I can't afford that, and it's such a misnomer. I think it's not the right phrase, misnomer. So,
well, and especially for the people that fall under Medicare, Medicaid. I mean, those are your tax dollars at work.
Yeah.
I mean, you've worked your whole life to
not all of it.
Benefit. Well, right. But I mean, the main reason they don't talk about it is because who likes to talk about, coming to terms with losing a loved one?
Yeah. And I wonder if, are we, please pardon me as I throw we into this conversation, are we all now just getting into this age where, okay, we need to start talking about it, where 20 years ago, I'm like, I ain't got time for that. I don't want to talk about headstones. I don't want to talk about that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's been a big goal of the hospice and palliative care community, is to have people do their advanced care planning documents, talk about it. My experience is that when you sit down and talk with your loved ones well in advance, the ideal is that you do it well in advance of some god-awful diagnosis. It can actually open doors to really deepen your relationship with your loved one. Yeah. And you'll talk about things and they'll say things that you didn't know otherwise. And like I was doing an advanced care planning talk with a group at Crystal Towers, I don't know, in the late 2000s probably. And this little lady was sitting there and tears started rolling down her cheek. And we were talking about all the different things you want to, share with your family that are important to you and in life, that kind of thing. And, and she, well, let me just say real quick, what I like to talk about is your perfect last day on the planet.
Yeah.
If you could describe your perfect last day on the planet, like mine would be Louis Armstrong is playing It's a Wonderful World in the background. I've got about 50 different last meals I'm going to have a bite of. The list keeps growing. I want somebody baking a cobbler in the oven so I can smell it. And I want somebody holding my hand. I don't care if they have to do round the clock shifts. I want somebody holding my hand. So then I would ask the group, think about what your perfect last day on the planet is and share that with your family, because they might not know what is important to you.
Sure.
And this little lady has some tears coming down her cheeks. And I said, what is it? What'd I say? And she said, I want my bird on my shoulder. And I said, well, does your family know you want your bird on your shoulder? And she said, no. And I said, well, promise me you will tell them tonight that you want your bird on your shoulder.
Yeah.
No.
That we all talk about, when I die, I want you to do this, and I'll publicly state when I die, there's no funeral, there's no burial, but I have put money aside for there to be a party. And I have put money aside for there to be a party. I think Randy has heard this. And Tina, I'm sharing with you and anybody else on here who knows me, but you cannot come to the party unless you bring a Teddy story.
Awesome.
Yeah.
See, that's perfect.
But that's after I die. But what about that last day? I want that to happen. I want to know it happen. I want to believe it happens. How's that the right word? But that day of, the hell am I doing that day of? And there's no bird. And I'm sorry, Tina, there's no cobbler. Randy, you did take a note about the cobbler. So you got to.
I did.
Yeah.
I did. Teddy, I'll hold your hand if you want somebody to hold your hand. I'll hold your hand, Teddy.
Thank you. But I have
Tina, I'll hold your hand too. I'll hold your hand too.
Teddy, to your point, there was a lady that planned her funeral. She wanted a big party, but she wanted it done before she died.
Oh, yeah.
Because she wanted to hear all the lovely things everybody's going to say. So
I don't want to hear them because I know daggone well the Teddy stories are out there are all not good. And by the way, that's part of the whole thing, Tina. And for this is all about planning. The end of life. I say to people, I don't care what the story is. You can bring any story you got. There's no story out there about the stuff that I did, that good, bad, or indifferent, that after I'm dead, tell them all.
Sure.
And I've lived a clean life, so don't worry about it. So go ahead, Randy.
I'll share it for the end if we have time. Share a little anecdotal thing, something about my mom. So
yeah. And Dan, you're right. An Irish wake, but you can't come to my Irish wake, Dan, unless you bring a story. I'll buy the beer and pretzel and pizza and steak or whatever, but you got to bring a Teddy story. So where are we, Tina? Where are we? So there are lots of hospices. They're all different. They all have different structures. They all probably have different, to some degree or another, have different policies. They have to conform to the rules of having a hospice, which means you have to have these resources in place. Tina, how does someone, if they're interested in being a volunteer, tell a little bit about how people can be a volunteer and what do volunteers do? And you can only put it in context to ours, but talk a little bit about that.
Okay. Just call them. All of them need volunteers, whether they're for profit or not. They all need volunteers. And some people want to volunteer to work events.
Yeah.
Some people want to volunteer to write thank you notes for donations. Some people want to volunteer like your loved one did and actually sit with the patients or take them to the doctor's appointments or what have you. Another beautiful segment where we just finished Memorial Day is veteran volunteers that will volunteer to sit, talk with, work with veteran patients.
Yeah.
That's enormous because, my favorite story, a Navy volunteer went to see a Navy patient at the hospice home, knocked on the door. The wife comes. He said, I'm just here to, pay my respects and thank him for his service. And the wife said, you know what? I appreciate it, but he's very close to dying and he won't know you're here and that's okay. And the volunteer said, well, I understand that, and I don't mean to push, but can I just thank him for his service real quick? Long story short, she says, come on in. He sits down, takes the man's hand, says, sir, thank you so much for your service. I was also in the Navy. And that patient's eyes popped open and he said, Navy. And they talked for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And that lady walked the volunteer out at the end of the 30 minutes. And he said, I didn't mean to pry her. And she goes, are you kidding me? I mean, you just gave me 30 more minutes with them that I didn't think I had. And all that to say, the veteran volunteers working with veteran patients is always a super, super special thing. But just reach out to your local volunteer. There will be somebody over that volunteer department, and they will love to connect you with whatever volunteer role you want to have. I mean, my son watered the plants on the campus. That's what he did. So yeah, there's something for everybody.
Good, got it. And I can't imagine, or I could probably imagine a Marine walking in to see that Navy vet, and he says, hey, I'm a Marine, and that Navy vet probably would have still sparked up and said, get out of my house.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm being facetious to be.
Oh, I know, but I'm well aware of the branch rivalries.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty funny.
So, all right, here's another big one, Tina. Advanced care planning. What is that? And why is that important to all of us?
Okay.
Oh, look, Randy, she came prepared, dude.
I know it. I better be taking some notes here.
Okay, so you typically have homeowners insurance in case your house burns down if you own a home, or you have renter's insurance in case you burn something, whatever.
You burn the house down.
That's right. Advanced care planning simply means you are making your wishes known, like I said, hopefully long before there's some kind of crisis going on. And there's two main components to it. There's a living will and a healthcare power of attorney. The living will is a piece of paper. It doesn't talk. It's not a living person, but it's a piece of paper where you make known how you feel about machines that are going to keep you alive. Yeah. Ventilators, artificial nutrition, hydration, things like that. So it's only about machine that you would not live unless you were connected to this kind of machine. Yeah. A healthcare power of attorney agent is a living, breathing person that is going to speak for you if you're not able to speak for yourself. So that applies to, you're going to go in for back surgery. You're out on anesthesia. You can't talk. They get in there and they find all kinds of god awful things. They're going to talk to your healthcare agent about what do you think we should do. And at end of life care, advanced care planning, hopefully you will have had that conversation about your perfect last day or the party. And you can only come if you tell a Teddy story or whatever that thing is that you want to be part of your end of life care. You're going to have a conversation with this person, and it's not a one and done because people change their minds as years go by. But there are two simple documents now. If you just Google Advanced Directives North Carolina, one of the sheets is just instruction. The second sheet is the living will, just one sheet. Third sheet is healthcare power of attorney. The last sheet is you get it notarized in front of a notary. So don't sign it until you're in front of a notary. 3 little pieces of paper, and you don't file it in the lockbox. You make copies like confetti, give it to everybody, make sure everybody knows what you want and what you don't want and all that kind of thing. But again, it's ideally you do it before the crisis. And if you're dealing with somebody with Alzheimer's or dementia, ideally, you're going to do it while they're still decisional and can understand what the decisions are. If your loved one is past the point of being decisional, hopefully you will have, figured out who's going to, be their healthcare power of attorney. Yeah. But all I pray and beg of all your listeners is, if you haven't done it, and 1 in 4 of us have, meaning 3 in 4 of us have not. Yeah. Please sit down, interview yourself first, try to figure out, do I want a ventilator? And if this is happening, do this, but if this is happening, don't do that. Go through all the different scenarios in that conversation. You can't hit every topic, but you can give them enough of a feel that when XYZ happens, they remember what you said and they can make a more informed decision instead of wringing their hands and guessing and living the rest of their life not knowing if they did the right thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Quick
that's-
question, attorneys. Do attorneys have to get involved to draw this
No.
up? It sounds like you can print it off the internet. So
Absolutely.
you
just
don't have
need
to
a
have an
notary.
attorney.
You just need a notary to sign it. And if you have a local hospice in your area and you don't have access to internet, go to the hospice. They'll give you the advanced directive forms.
Yeah. I think part of what I just heard you say, though, Tina, is two things I heard you say very clearly. Number one, have a conversation with yourselves and maybe whiteboard that, write it down so you can look at it and hear yourself talking about it so you understand what you're saying to yourself. And then secondly, have these conversations with your loved ones, and whether it's your family member or an executor of your world or whatever that is, but have conversations with people and then fill those forms out and make sure that everybody associated with you understands what those are.
That's exactly right. And when you have that conversation, bring everybody in your life together. You want to make sure you got 3 kids. You want to make sure all 3 kids hear what's coming out of your mouth, so they're not arguing later. One wants to go on the ventilator and one doesn't.
Yeah.
Well, they can say, you know what, we talked to Dad about this and this is what he said. And also things change. Like I said, maybe this brand new fabulous med's going to come out for cancer. And there was a day when you last did the documents or had the conversation that you didn't want any curative treatment. Well, now they got this wonderful med coming out and you're like, I'll try that. So, you can change your mind. The main thing is to give them the ballpark picture of Teddy wants a party. You can't come unless you tell Teddy's story, and everybody knows that.
Yep. Yeah.
To bring your own beer too, Teddy? Do you have to,
No, dude, I'm buying, man. I'm buying. Not just
on you. That's one last party on you. I like that. I'll be there.
Randy, I want to hear about your mom. What were you going to talk about your mom?
Well, I don't want to get all weepy about it because I don't have all the detail on it, but she had, among other things, cancer. And I remember my dad said she was back in Rhode Island, but she was in I don't know that she was involved with hospice. I don't know that for sure, but she was in a nursing home or some kind of skilled care facility. And her last wish was she wanted to come home one last day. But she was too ill to be able to be transported. So she never got her final wish. I don't know. And I kind of bring that up because I don't know when she voiced that.
Yeah.
And if she had voiced it sooner, when she was more stable, I guess, to be transported, maybe she could have had that happen. Yeah. But maybe waited until the very end and it was just too late to transport her. I don't know. I'll never know because my dad's dead too. So, but yeah, these are all important conversations to have. But it's a little bit like we had last week when we had the financial planning and all the things with inflation and the market and, having discussions and real candid talk about finances. A lot of us put that, I know I have, we just put it off. And it's the same thing with this. Who wants to talk about dying and all that? We want to talk about fun stuff.
Yeah. But these conversations can be fun.
Yeah.
They can be fun.
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying is I think it's something we need to do. It's just that we put it off because it can be difficult and we just don't want to talk about that stuff. We want to talk about, the lunch with Randy and Teddy and all the great fun we have.
Yeah.
Tina, this is great. Thank you very much for coming.
Oh, it's been my honor. Thank you.
Really appreciate you and you joining us today for these conversations. Really got, you got me thinking about things that I know I also need to think about as well. And hey, our next week who do we have next week, Randy? Do you know?
Nikki Bennett. Bennett.
Yeah, Nikki's gonna be a great conversation. Nikki Bennett, why can't I find her stuff, Randy? There she is. I got it. Yep. I got it. So Nikki Bennett is with the Legacy Federal Credit Union. Nikki Bennett is going to come to the show and have a conversation with us. This will be another one we all need to pay attention to. Randy and I are getting smart and we're trying to bring you guys stuff that you want, Dan. And Nikki's going to come talk about what she's referred to as, I told Tina, elder exploitation. And it's going to be about, how we need to pay attention. She's going to bring a conversation. There's another term she used that I thought was pretty important too. Oh, pig butchery. We're going to talk about pig butchering. I don't know what it is, Tina. Actually, I do, but I'm not going to give it away. But it's all about elder abuse, investment scams. It's all about, credit hacking. We need to pay attention to these things. And so join us next week, 11:55 a.m. on what day is that, Randy? It's got next.
That is June 7th.
June 7th with Nikki Bennett from a Legacy Federal Credit Union. And I can promise you it's content you need to hear. So, Randy, anything before I go to our closing remarks?
No, I think excellent. Tina, thanks for sharing. I learned a lot. I really did. I learned a lot. And hospice was never something I had to contend with, but I'm not any younger. I mean, I'm not as old as Teddy, but, it's something that I'm going to need to have discussions with family member about how we're going to plan this thing out. And so I appreciate you sharing what you did because it's important. Really
absolutely. And I'm noticing a couple of the comments with people thanking me. Can I just say, if anybody does want to email me with questions or want to set up a time to chat more about whatever's going on with them, the email is super easy. It's just tina@itsabouthowyoulive.com.
It's abouthowyoulive.com. Yeah, I'll drop that in the chat. So good stuff. Hey, our show is sponsored by Blackwell Captive Solutions. We appreciate their help with the show. We appreciate all of our attendees for coming here. And Tina, you're fabulous. Thank you very much for being here. We'll see everybody another day.
Thank you both. Bye.